Welcome to Top of the Grid podcast, hosted by myself, Scarlett Archer, and Amber Jones.
Today we have a very special guest. It is Alex Brundle, the broadcaster, commentator and racing driver, and we're going to chat to him all about his journey in racing and also in his broadcasting role. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. So we want to kick it off with taking it back to the very, very beginning, of your career, really. I know you started off in karting and everyone's like, your dad pushed you into that. I have heard previously you've said your dad didn't push you. It's just something that you kind of wanted to do. So how did that come about?
I mean, it just seemed like the obvious route, right? The corporate kart track when you're 6 instead of 8. I mean, nowadays 5 would be a reasonable time to start in a go-kart, hilariously and crazily. Back then it was like you don't really see a competitive karting venue till you're 8 or 9. So I'd go down and jump on a cadet, at a corporate kart track when I was sort of 6, and I'd want to go again, and then I'd want to go again, and then I'd want to go again, and so it was relatively clear it was something I wanted to do. What I will say is that there was definitely no kind of, are you sure you want to do that? It was always like, okay, you want to do that? Right, cool. Let's head off to the local kart track then with a cadet, which was great and a massive privilege to be able to just go karting like that, right? Something that you don't realize at the time because you're 9, but you do realize now that you could just go racing, which was awesome. And I absolutely loved it. To begin with, I was terrible. And then I just improved and improved through karting till I led and won races, and then we went single-seater racing after that.
So is karting crucial? Because I know a lot of people have sort of different entry points into the sport, and I speak to a lot of different drivers now, and some of them, didn't come from karting. Some of them don't even enjoy karting. Was it, the same for you? You really enjoyed it, or can you sort of skip that out if you didn't want to do it?
I think that to build the pathways that you need, and I'm talking sort of mental pathways almost, you've got to start so young when your brain is still forming, that actually karting is really the only way now to have the pure muscle memory to be able to race at the very top level. And I'm proven wrong there by certain drivers who've started incredibly late and still done an amazing job of it. I mean, I'm reminded, I'm sure there are other more prevalent examples, but I'm reminded of top sports car star Maxime Martin, who started in his sort of early 20s, I believe, driving in Mini Challenge, and then now as a BMW Works driver. So but you need to make those muscle memories, because you can always tell, even if you sit in a road car next to a top flight race car driver, there's a certain way they apply the controls, they turn the wheel, they do all of the things in a car. There's a certain way they react when traffic moves in front of them that you just learn with your 10,000 hours, right? So whether you like karting or not, you kind of have to go there these days if you want to race in Formula One. I much preferred racing cars. It suited me much better. In generally, the quicker things went, the more generally competitive I was.
So I do commentary for the F1 Kids broadcast. I know, you've not just done driving, you've basically done everything in the motorsport world. So how did you end up getting into commentary? And was that difficult for you? I mean, I'm guessing that, your driving experience really helped you in doing that.
Yeah, it did. And obviously I've seen my father commentate in Formula One for years and years and years. So I had a great mentor in him. I was asked by Will Buxton off the back of a GP3 season in 2012. I moved to sports cars in 2013. I was at the British Grand Prix and got a text from Will Buxton saying, do you want to come and commentate on the GP3?
Gosh.
So I stood in the back of the tent at Silverstone, did that comms. I think I got in trouble. I got in trouble for something. I can't remember if I remember getting in trouble for something, but I can't remember exactly what it was. I think I jumped the gun on a cue or something like that. Anyway, invited me for the next round in Spa, and I went and did that one. Then went and did Monza. had this. It was back in the days when F1 comms was done universally from the circuit. Had some amazing experiences coming in and out of Monza. Then was offered a test with Works Bentley in a GT3 instead of going to the next round. And obviously, I would have been 22. So Alex Brundle at 22 is going and driving the GT3 car. I let F1 down pretty late on. And so they went, okay, fine, we'll use someone else. And I believe, I can't remember exactly who got the seat. Then much later, I'd done all my sports car career, and it was sort of a few years from, I guess, the end of this last tranche of World Endurance Championship races. I re-met, I should say, Dean Locke, who's head of content at Formula One, while I was doing a speech at the RAC club. And he kind of went, "You're doing less and less racing. Would you like to come and do more and more commentary?" And we reconnected that way. And that's how this little set of commentary began. It's a really weird one because obviously, I'm sure being my dad's sons helped massively, with them hearing about me and perhaps thinking that I might be able to do some comms. But in the direct route to that, he had no engagement at all. Of course, later he's had massive engagement with me in assisting me in making sure that I'm doing the job I need to be doing.
The thing is, your dad might have helped you, but if you don't have the skill, then, you're not going to get the jobs in the first place. And one thing that I always think is like commentary, some people find it easier than others, but it is really difficult because you have to think on the spot and you don't want to get anything wrong. And if you didn't have the drive to, want to do it and want to put the work into it, then you just wouldn't get the jobs. It is, quite challenging. So you do have to have the drive, from within. There's not other things that you can just blame it on.
It's one of those things. I think the seat across from me, by the way, I mean, I sit very much in the technical seat, the driver's seat, if you like, although sometimes those people are engineers. I think the colour side is again a step in terms of its difficulty. People in businesses don't last very long if they just continuously make hires based around who they like and who they don't. Everybody in major businesses, particularly businesses like Formula One, with massive shareholder bases and targets to hit and viewerships to hit and big money moving around, they lose their job pretty quickly if they're not delivering. So they rely on you to deliver. You rely on them to remunerate you for delivery. So it's a continuous competitive struggle, as you both know in building your broadcasting careers, to make sure that you're delivering the content. You know what you need to know. You're turning up on time. You're sounding informed and succinct. Otherwise, you're a goner, man. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you know. You're a goner.
Then you're out.
I was going to ask, when I do my commentary, I've got lots of things that I do to prepare. So what do you do to keep prepared and keep up to date, before races?
So I have several resources that I use, and it's a mixture of a statistical resource that F1 provide. So F1 have an awesome resource called F1 Insight, which is available to broadcasters, which categorizes and logs all of the interviews that are done, for example, on a Thursday with all the Formula One drivers, all the Formula 2 drivers. So what I do is I have a couple of days of preparation. I'll leave those interviews running on a loop in my house while I'm researching other things. And I'll just listen to all of those interviews. Then the teams provide excellent statistical resources, particularly Mercedes. Will give you speed for each corner, gaps down to turn one, sides of the grid for pole, all of that kind of stuff, statistical resources. And you need to be a bit careful because some of those resources can be slightly biased towards, obviously, their own team and their own statistics. So you need to take in a broad range of those. Then I use a brilliant website called newsnow.com, which takes in all of the news broadcasts about Formula One from the recent time. You can select by month, and then specific keywords if you want. So you can get like a broad range of views on a certain topic, and it logs and categorizes those. So I'll fire those then into a dictator machine because I learn best by hearing. and I'll just leave those on a loop for a day as well, and just let them read out to me in my house. So yeah,
Scarlett's taking notes right now. She's like, right,
it's like you have like a little
commentary.
F1 fairy, and it like
It's
flies
as
around
tragic.
and it puts it in your ears.
Yeah,
Oh my
it's
gosh.
as tragic as that. Yeah. So, but I cover obviously the World Endurance Championship as well, and Formula One, and then last year I did a little bit of racing myself. I run a little team for some historic cars. So I would let actually, and this sometimes catches me out in exactly this forum actually. Where people on podcasts go, so the Formula 2 Championship, just run us through the order at the moment. And we're in the gap, you know, between sort of Monza and Qatar. And like, I've let that knowledge lapse because I'll reconnect with it because I can't retain that information between. So I'll then reconnect with it about a week before. And I compartmentalize it like that.
It's like you put it into your short-term memory. So you put it into your short-term memory for when you need it, then you put it away, and then you can bring it back.
And then it comes back. It's actually really refreshing to hear you say that though, Alex, because I feel like I resonate with that, where I say if someone asks me a question, because obviously they think you know the answer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awful. I don't know the answer, but I should know the answer. But it is because you know it for when you need to know it, and then you've got a million other jobs coming up. So your brain then just latches to that. And I do always feel quite guilty. I'm like, should I have this information in my head 24/7? But it's nice to hear from yourself. It's like, no, it is then. You do know it. You're on to the next one. You sort of put it away. Then you're back into the next one because you have to. You can't retain all this information at once. But then I think that's where sometimes I have that pressure. But I don't know if you ever feel, you know, a pressure. Did you have it when you first came into a commentary broadcast role?
Totally, and I've got better at it. You know, it's a weird thing. Like, you get better at retaining information. You know, the bits I do for F1TV, where I'll jump in front of our tech pad, which is, you know, for a British audience who might not get F1TV, it's the F1TV equivalent of the Sky Pad, where I play that role for them. But let's say I'm analysing a start. I would need to know the distance from pole to turn one, perhaps the speed of the apex of turn one, and then, you know, the top 5 drivers in the race that's going to happen now. And then I'll have a sequence of clips where from previous years where I need to remember who's in which of the McLarens, who's in which of the Ferraris, who's in which of the Red Bulls, because obviously the drivers have changed and so on and so forth. I might, when I first started, have been able to remember 3 of those facts and then have to repeat one in my mind. Then you end up not being succinct up front because you're having to repeat facts in your mind. Now it just sits in my brain for whatever reason, which is, I guess, just reps, you know?
But also, you've just sort of, because you've done it so often, you're not going into it thinking, oh, I hope I don't mess up on this or this or this or this, because you know you can do it. You're just sort of going into it really natural. Like, it comes out how it comes out, and that's it. And you rely on your memory then. You're not having that external pressure that then it ruins sort of the job when you go into it.
It's just like driving, you know, like if you asked me to explain how you turn into cops, I couldn't. Like, I couldn't tell you. And, you know, and but when I first learned to turn into cops, somebody explained to me how to do it. You know, I learned it, but now it's become, you know, the understanding of the exact techniques you're working with and that kind of thing. I let that stuff fall away. And, you know, I think that it's really important, especially in a modern era of broadcasting, not to fluff at all. You know, because there's so much fluff going on about maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Oh, I'm just asking questions about, you know, this. I think the audience are crying out for accurate, balanced broadcasting of motorsport from people who've taken the time and bothered to research it, rather than just, you know, read an article, you know, copy and paste 3 key facts onto their Twitter feed. You know, I think so. I try and do that.
Amber and I always get loads of messages from people about how you get into the industry. And obviously there's not one way to get into it at all. You know, everyone gets into it in completely random ways. So what advice have you got for people who might want to get into karting or just get into the motorsport world?
I mean, I am probably not the right person to ask, right? Yeah. Because, you know, I come from a motorsport dynasty. I moved into commentary straight off the back of a racing career. So, I make no bones about my journey, and just to sit in front of a podcast and go, well, let me tell you, Alex Brundle's course about how to get
You need to do
into
this, and then do that, and then
exactly, exactly. Sign up to my agency and join my free course. I mean, no, right? So, honestly, from what I can do is see things from my perspective, sort of backwards down through the people that I work with, who do the kind of roles, in terms of presenting, the Laura Winters of this world, the Alex Jakeses of this world, those kind of people, and I can see several factors that tie those people together. Firstly, they are like ducks, which is a weird thing to say, but they paddle under the surface and they look like they swan on top. So the work behind the scenes to make it look effortless is outrageous from them. Alex Jakes will work beyond the hours you hear him on air, another 2-3 hours a day on a race weekend. They all have cold called at length broadcasters. And to the point where it eventually worked out, and they all have done exactly what you guys are doing, and it's one of the wonders. In many ways, there are many negatives to social media and the connected world, the sort of the dangers of it and the abuse of it and all of those other things. But one of the great things about it is you can start, right? Just as you guys are correctly doing, you can start and begin to broadcast and build your skill set and build your audience base. And so I think, doing exactly what you guys are doing while just making contact up the chain surely has to be the way. Start where you are, I guess.
What would be quite crucial with all of your knowledge is sort of, where do you find the information for the next steps? Because a lot of parents always say to me, oh, my child's in karting, how do I get them in single seaters, or how do I get them in GT racing? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm not the right person to ask, but I can go ask my network how to do that. And that's what we want to do on this podcast is, okay, we've got Alex Brundle on, he's so well connected. Where can people get this information?
So I would say, from a driver's perspective, so the guidance from my father kind of, I guess, ended when I was about 21. So he took me all the way through single seaters, and then I guess the sports car stuff I did the meetings alone or with a hired manager very briefly, but mostly alone. So even with the extra amount of connection that I had, the amount of times I went alone to a racing paddock that I wasn't racing in, I would say I went to more races I wasn't racing in than ones I was every year of my sports car racing career. So,
and that's to get the connections, to get your face in those paddocks to be like, oh, it's Alex Brundle, he's looking for a drive.
Exactly that.
And people will remember you. If you keep seeing people, you'll eventually get into their brain. I mean, it's like, I got a job on Sky because I just kept emailing the producer and connecting with them. And we're so lucky now that social media is so big, because it might seem a bit pointless sometimes, putting things out there and not getting many people seeing it. But the more you put things out and the more you try and get things, eventually, it will lead to something.
I think that as well, and this is something I am incredibly British. I kind of, and in a way where I'm worried about bothering people, we're worried about bothering people. And, you don't want to be that person. Oh, it's Amber again. And she's emailing me again. And God, won't this girl leave me alone? Whereas, there are other places in the world. And I think that I've lost out a lot because firstly, people are expecting to be bothered. Right, they're expecting to be sold to, especially if they're seeking talent. So many of the people who are looking for drivers or who are looking for talent, and they're really similar industries, by the way, because either your producer or your team manager can't see the wood for the trees. And the amount of times I've sat when I'm inside a racing team with a group of the management, a team where I'm like incumbent, you know, like for example, Jotasport, like I drove for them for a couple of years, and it was like, we're going to have Alex and who else? It was the vibe in the team. So you sit there and you think there are hundreds, probably thousands of drivers trying to drive for this racing team, and the manager's sitting there going, who should we have? God, I just can't think of anyone who would do the job. And you're like, my God, there must be. And then they end up going for the last person who mailed them, just because they're in the top of the mind. You know,
it's just that last pick. It's like, oh, okay, we'll just fill it with this person.
Because essentially these roles are in demand, and you're the last person that messaged them. You prove that you can do the job, but effectively, you know, and it's just, you just got to run at the wall enough times, right? Or have an in like I did. And as I said at the very top of this section, like I'm in no position to preach about that, because effectively I've had massive amounts of connection, and all I can do is try and do that justice by doing a good job.
I think you can preach a little bit, definitely, because it's merit as well. You know, you haven't just got there because there's a name attached to you. Because if you were awful at driving and awful at commentating, they'll be like, right, we're getting rid of Alex Brundle. Gosh, what
doesn't matter who said this. He's absolutely terrible. You obviously got the wrong genes.
Send me a driver who hasn't been fired, and I'll send you a driver who's not trying hard enough.
Well, exactly. No, that it's so competitive, though. Obviously, in racing, one little mistake and the team's like, oh, we're not happy with them. Let's get them out. We spoke a bit about commentary and karting, but then when you got into, you know, the peak of your career, I guess this moment I'm going to talk about is amazing and defining, but it's also a little bit tricky. And I heard you talk about it on a different interview when you got that P2 at Le Mans. You're on the podium, but your teammates have taken the P1. So you're buzzing. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm at the podium at Le Mans, but we didn't get the win. I know you had some sort of conflicted feelings, but you're also really young. And then you have this whole brand that you need to put a bit of a face on and save face. How was that moment for you?
Yeah, and you know, I wish I'd enjoyed it more. I had no filter back then. I look back on those days, and I was like young and super fiery, and I stand on this it makes me giggle a bit now, because I stand on this like palatial podium at Le Mans, looking out over the crowd as they're all waving their flags, and I look miserable as sin. Because we've not won the race. But that's honestly, I make no apologies for that mindset, because it's the mindset that you had to have. We drove our hearts out in that race. It is a defining moment in your career, and it's just such a huge event. You know, to finally, because of course you've been on the podium in junior single seaters, and most of the junior single seater racing I did, I was in kind of series where there'd be a bit of a crowd. You know, obviously I moved through to GP3 and was on the podium there. And there's the F1 crowd, but it's still the morning. There's a bit of a sort of a smattering of crowd, and you know, everyone's auntie and mum and a couple of diehards are kind of in the crowd, right? And then you're at Le Mans, and it's like, wow, okay, paying public to the level of a major FA Cup final are standing below the podium going, Alex Brundle is on that podium, and you're thinking, wow, this is wild. Like I've never experienced anything like this, but that's just overcome with kind of like, because you know that it doesn't come around that often.
Exactly. And I think it's nice to look back on now. You're like, okay, in that moment, I was obviously going through a roller coaster of emotions, but looking back, that was just amazing to be there. But I feel like you've had so many moments where there has been a lot of pressure in sort of racing environments, you know, even in F2. How do you then overcome the pressure?
The worst pressure is I've actually ever had is in sports cars, and it comes from being handed cars in the lead of major races. I think that's one of the greatest amounts of pressure that you can have as a racing driver. Actually, you know, for example, I've been handed cars in the lead of Le Mans like 4 or 5 times, at least in our class. And just you have to stop your mind thinking about everything that can go wrong. I work very hard on sort of concentration training, meditation, that kind of thing, because essentially you just have to edit out all of the what ifs and live entirely in the present. I mean, it's great because the mental training for motorsport, and I'm not qualified to speak of other sports, but definitely for motorsport, can be handled almost in its entirety through one basic practice, which is make sure your mind's in the present all the time. That takes away any disappointment, any anger, any resentment, any annoyance, any pressure, because effectively you're only ever focusing on exactly what you're doing right there and then. I was told something very early in my career, when I went to go and see Hintsa Performance, the great Aki Hintsa's company in Finland, and it's something that really stuck with me. Well, there are two quotes actually, which is think performance, not result. So if you start thinking about how this looks from the grandstand, does everybody think I'm doing a great job? Are we going to win this race? How is this playing out? You immediately lose focus and do a bad job.
Your mind's just gone then.
Exactly that. The second is you're the performance, not the audience. So you're at work. You're at work and you're in the performance. Never get sucked into watching the sport. You're not high when it's high. You're not low when it's low. You're backstage. This has got nothing to do with you.
Racing and broadcasting as well.
Yes. I mean, and often like some of the commentators that have jumped in with me, who've been kind enough, maybe they've been sort of earlier on in commentary careers and asked me for advice. That's one of the things I've kind of tentatively suggested, is because there are times when I sit there listening to my co-commentator and they're making such a great point, man, and I'm agreeing the hell out of it, and then it's my turn to speak and I've got nothing to say. So there's that.
Stay tuned for episode 2 with Alex Brundle, coming soon.